So now it is time to answer your questions. So just as a reminder, when posing your questions in the chat, please list them for all panelists.
So our first one is, I have a BS in construction management, and I understand that my education might count toward 36 months of credit. What about the 12 months remaining? So yes, the most you can ever receive in educational credit is 36 months once we review your transcripts. Any remaining time is in actual hands-on work. So you will always, at the bare minimum, have to show at least a 1 year of experience hands on the job in the classification that you're going for. You just mentioned downloading the slides. How can I do this? I believe at the top of our website, the CSLB website, where it has the banner showing about this presentation, one of the links is to download the presentation as well.
Okay, so before that, I do see a changing business entity from sole owner, DBA, to corporation. They want to confirm what should be done first. Should the contractor state license be changed first or create the corporation first? So if you have a sole ownership first, you can, in the background, go ahead and get your corporation registered with the California Secretary of State's office, because you do need to have that registration number, and it does have to be in good standing with them before you can apply to go from a sole owner to a corporation. So you definitely first have to be licensed. So I would recommend that you have your sole ownership in place, and then behind the scenes you can start doing the corporation information, and then submit that to us on an application so that we can change your entity for you. So you would send in a new application with the fees to get that going with us.
All right. Does the fingerprint require apply to out-of-country corporate officers? Anyone that is going to be listed on the license for the California license will need to be fingerprinted, and that includes if those people are out-of-country corporate officers that will be a part of the license, everyone listed on the license will need to be fingerprinted. Once again, they can either do it by hard card, sending it in, which does take a while, or they can come to California, have it done by live scan, which is much quicker.
And as a reminder too, all officers, anybody listed on that application, they have to have either a social security number or an I-10. If they don't have either of those, they cannot be listed on the application.
All right.
Are the examples shown for out-of-state, military, federal, and government entities only examples, or are these the only type of work? So those were just an example of what possibly could have supplied your work experience. Obviously, if there's anything that we've forgotten, left out, you're more than welcome to supply that when you send in your application as part of your work experience, and it will be reviewed.
All right. I think this one's kind of a follow-up to the other one. Do all the personnel listed in Section 4 of the application required to give their fingerprints? Yes. So anyone on the application is going to be required to go through the fingerprint background process. Slide 40, how should this be completed for an LLC with non-U.S. citizens listed as officers of the company? Have to look back at slide 40 if that's referring to the personnel page. As Dana just said, everyone is required to have Social Security number and ITIN, or one of those two to be listed on the license, whether they're in country or out of country. And once again, everyone on the license will need to be fingerprinted as well.
And just a quick note, as mentioned in the slides, as a corporation, you are required to list a president, secretary, and treasurer. Those 3 titles and the individuals that hold those titles have to be on your application. If those individuals happen to be somebody out of country who is a non-U.S. citizen, unfortunately, it's going to come to a standstill with your application. By law, we have to have a social security number or an I-10. My recommendation would maybe be to move them to like a director of the corporation, and put somebody else in the slot of president, secretary, treasurer, as those are mandatory titles that have to be listed on the application and on your license. What if the college send us electric official transcripts? So we actually are able to receive electric transcripts directly from the college. There cannot be a third person involved. However, they do have to be easily accessible. We will not and cannot, due to security purposes, make an account or have to log in to do it. If it's like a click on a link and provide this password, and it pops up and we can print them, that's great. Otherwise, sealed transcripts mailed in with your application is what we will need.
If I applied and my packet was sent back for corrections, do I have a time limit when my original application becomes void and I must pay all the fees again? So yes, applications from the time your application is assigned to a technician, there is 90 days to complete that process. We don't take into account if there is, a 2-week time to get a technician assigned to you. It's just from the time that a technician is assigned to your application. Also, once that technician has been assigned to you, and if you do need corrections, it doesn't go to the end of the line again. You're dealing directly with that technician with getting your corrections back into them. The most common one that usually takes long enough for an application to go void and you have to start the process over is if you are going to be a corporation or an LLC, make sure you have that in place and registered at Secretary of State first before you apply, so that you don't have to go through that wait process with the Secretary of State.
How many times is one allowed to retake the exam if one fails? So once your application is posted, which means it's deemed acceptable, we refer you to testing. You have 18 months to pass your exams that need to be taken. And there is a 3-week wait between each time you take the test if you fail. So overall, you have 18 months to complete the testing process. But again, if you fail and you have to keep taking one or the other test over 3 weeks in between each time you take that, after you've paid the $100 non-refundable exam fee.
Is a qualifier required for all classifications, primarily the C61? Yes. Every license will have a designated qualifier for the license. While a C61 specialty classification, those are the D classification subcategories, don't require a trade exam, they do require a law exam and will require a qualifier on all licenses.
How does experience on the financial accounting side of construction apply towards licensing? Well, your experience, what we're looking for is hands-on or supervisory of employees of the same employer that you work for. So if you're doing financial or accounting side of it and not the hands-on, chances are there's a possibility that that would not count towards it. We do want to see hands-on. We do want to see supervision. We do want to see that you're involved in the everyday today aspects of that construction project.
And kind of piggybacking on that one, our next question, under supervision, I didn't see superintendent. is that similar to other supervisory terms. So a supervisor on a construction site can be listed as experience, but what we're looking for when we're listing something like superintendent or supervision is an indication by your certifier as how you became a supervisor or superintendent. In other words, you know, after working hands-on for 1, 2, 3 years, became a supervisor and supervised construction projects. So they're looking for how you became a supervisor as well as the duties that you performed in there.
Can we do both tests on the same day? And what happens if I pass a trade test and not the law test? So I believe you can still take them both on the same day because we are using a testing site called PSI. If you pass one and you do not pass the second one, well, again, you do have to pay the $100 non-refundable retest fee, and you do have to wait 3 weeks. But then you can go ahead and schedule the test that you failed. Again, 18 months from the time that you're posted, deemed acceptable to pass both of those tests if you've applied for an A, B, or the C classes.
If I have a suspended license in another state, would that be taken into consideration when applying for a California license? Possibly. We do have connections with other states for reciprocity and other licensing guidelines. So depending upon why that license was suspended and the circumstances around it, if it's something that would show up on a criminal background, we may get notification of that, and it may cause a situation where they will ask for more detailed information as to the circumstances around that. But once again, certain states, certain situations, that's all looked at on a case-by-case basis.
What if the person who used to supervise me does no longer work with the company? Can he still certify my work experience? So yes, on the certification of work experience form, there are several options to choose from. It does not have to be a licensed contractor. There can be business associates. There can be a fellow employee. They don't necessarily have to still work for the same employer. And they don't necessarily have to be a contractor. So it does not matter that they no longer work with that company. If they have firsthand knowledge of your experience and witness that, they can be your certifier.
Can an A-licensed contractor do swimming pool repair remodeling? Not typically. That's a C53, or there's also a D classification, which does pool repair and remodeling to certain degrees. If you have specific work that you're looking to see if your A classification will cover, your best bet would be to send an email to classifications@cslb.ca.gov. Detail the work that you're looking to try and do with that license, and we can give you more clarification of whether your license will allow you to do that specific work.
Can an entity have two separate applications with two different qualifying persons just as to make sure one of them passes the exam? So no, on an original application where somebody has no license history, only one classification can be applied for at a time with one qualifier. So that means that Joe and Bob are both applying for the B on one application. That cannot happen. And only one person can hold one classification at a time. So Joe and Bob cannot hold a B on the same license. Joe could hold a C36 plumbing and Bob can hold the B general building, but you can't do it on the same application at the same time, and you cannot hold the same class on a license at a time.
I have both residential journeyman experience and residential supervising experience, and also several years of commercial superintendent experience. Do either apply? Does commercial construction allow for commercial B license contracting? So some states do break up their licensing in like commercial B building licenses as well as residential. We do not. Construction experience we look at as construction experience depending on how it applies to your classification. But yes, residential journeyman experience and residential supervising experience, if it's the same classification and trade work, it doesn't matter whether it was supervisory or journeyman, it all adds up together. If it was for different companies, you'll want to do separate certifications of work experience with certifiers that have firsthand knowledge of that work for each of those companies and the time frames. But we don't differentiate between commercial and residential until you're doing things like A construction work, which wouldn't necessarily apply to B construction work.
My old company I worked for is refusing to give me my permitted jobs to show work experience. Will this affect my application? So, Dan, if your old company was a licensed contractor, chances are we are not going to ask for your finalized permits. However, I need a little bit more information on this one. Could it affect your application? Not to the point where it could possibly be, not go through. We might ask for other information that could verify the experience. But why don't you send us an email at licensing@cslb.ca.gov and just give me a little bit more information about your old company, just to give me more background, on how I can answer that question for you, Dan.
When do we submit insurance and bonding requirements? So when you send in an application, either a waiver application or an application that will require an examination, those requirements come after the application is posted and any testing requirements are completed. Then it goes to what we refer to as the issuance stage. They will give you a letter which outlines all of the issuance requirements for your particular license, and that's your insurance, your bonding, sometimes multiple bonding depending upon your entity, your initial license fee, and things like that. So that'll all happen after we have confirmed you have a completed application and completed any testing requirements that may be required. Then it will go to the issuance requirements.
How many years of qualified experience does a civil engineering BS degree provide? I work for a general contracting corporation, but would like to get my own contractor's license, which type of license is recommended? Is it a sole owner? So as stated in our presentation, dependent upon the classification that you're applying for and our review of your sealed transcript with your degree in it, we would have to review that first. We did, as shown on the screen right now, give you an example of what could possibly happen as far as credit for education. However, again, dependent upon the class that you're applying for and us actually reviewing your transcripts, we can't give you a definite answer. As far as which type of license is recommended, and you say, is it a sole owner? So are you asking what entity should you apply for? If that's the case, that's completely up to you. And you might want to consult a construction lawyer to see what would benefit you more as far as taxes and whatnot, because CSLB does not get into that. However, just to make sure that you are informed as a licensee, how it's going to affect you money-wise. But It's completely up to you what classification or what entity that you're going to apply for.
I received a PDF copy of my transcript from my apprenticeship program, but seems like this will not do. Do I need them to send a sealed official copy? So two different types of credit that you can get other than hands-on experience. One is educational and one is an apprenticeship program, two separate things. For an apprenticeship program to receive credit that way, there should be an apprenticeship certificate that is issued at the end of your apprenticeship program. That's what we'd be looking for on an apprenticeship. That doesn't need to come in a sealed envelope or anything. It's a certificate that you're given at the end of your apprenticeship program. If you're talking a trade school or a college or other educational establishment, that's when we would need the sealed official copy of your transcripts on your education to receive credit on that.
I hold an out-of-state Master Level C10 equivalent electrical license. Does the application need statements on licenses in good standing from the state agency, and who manages that licensing? So no. If you are applying here in the state of California, just like all other applicants, licensed in another state or not, you will need to provide a completed certification of work experience with a certifier who has firsthand knowledge of that experience that you have performed and or supervised with an employee or employer. We will not be looking at your standing with another state agency. Now, if you have the license with a state that we have reciprocity with, you could possibly apply for reciprocity. However, we just have Arizona, Louisiana, and Nevada. Do we have one more?
Louisiana, we just do the B classification.
True.
And then we do Arizona and Nevada.
So we just have three states that we have reciprocity with. If you don't hold that in one of those states, then again, as all applicants do, you would have to have your completed certification of work experience form with your application, and that would be reviewed.
Who is responsible for the licenses, IRS taxes, the qualifier, the entity? We don't deal with taxes or your business structure or that. We deal with the qualifier being responsible for the trade work performed, and that's it. That's all we're licensing is your ability to perform specific trade work in a classification. We don't look at anything else in the business structure or have anything to do with any of the taxes, financials. That's all on the business side.
What happens if we sent our paper transcripts separate from our application packet directly from the college? So transcript, we do have a place where we have sealed transcripts. If we do check it to make sure or to check to see if the person's whose name is listed on the transcript matches somebody who has an application in record. If they do, then that transcript is sent to the processing technician. The main thing I would say is that make sure that you are checking the box stating that you do have transcripts, and that would give your processing technician an indication to look for those. If you don't send in your application and we have those, they kind of just sit there because we don't send them back to the school, and I don't believe we have record of the address of the person whose name is listed on the transcripts. But you do kind of want to put them together to go hand in hand. If you have the sealed ones, the best case scenario is to send it in with your application at the time of submittal.
Does civil engineering work experience help in any way? civil engineering is very generic. We're looking for specific trade work done. Civil engineering degrees can, just as any college degree, can get you a certain amount of educational credit, which would be evaluated sending in your transcripts with your application. However, just saying civil engineering work isn't going to be able, once again, it would be what classification you're going for and what was the actual hands-on civil engineering work that was performed that would need to be listed on the certification of work experience.
Does office personnel count as part of the HIS team? More so, does any office staff need to be registered as a salesperson? So, office personnel, if we're just talking like a secretary, somebody who's not listed on the license, they cannot go out and negotiate any kind of a contract without being a registered HIS to that licensee. They have zero, as far as CSLB is concerned, input for that license, and that would include the HIS portion of it if somebody was going out and doing salesperson work. So if they wanted to negotiate, change, make a change order, orders stuff to come out as part of a project, they would have to be registered as a salesperson, and then they would have to be associated with that license. Otherwise, they can't do any of that.
What happens if a licensed contractor does not carry workers' comp insurance? Can it be reported? Absolutely. Contractors who have to carry workers' comp will report other contractors who are running employees without it, and that's what our enforcement team does. It is for the protection of the workers that are employed. That's why we have certain classifications that require workers' comp, even if the contractor claims there are no employees. It's work that is high-risk work and work that is very unlikely to be done without employees. So yes, you're subject to citations, fines, possible criminal charges if you are out there employing people and not carrying workers' compensation on your license if you're a licensed contractor.
Do other states accept California contractor's license? Our licenses are only good in California. As far as do they accept them, I don't know if you mean if you can use them as reciprocity in another state. I'm not quite certain what your question is. So a California contractor cannot go to Nevada and use their California license. They cannot go to Washington. They cannot go to Oregon. It is only good in the state of California.
I know a course is not needed to apply, but is there a recommended course one can take? There are lots of schools and courses out there. We are not associated or affiliated or recommend any of them. There is a lot of private industry out there that will claim to help you with your test or help you get your application. We are not associated with any of them. The CSLB we have things such as this workshop. We have a 1-800 number that you can call and ask questions about if you need help filling out your application. Once your application is submitted, a technician will review it, and anything that's missing or needing corrections, they'll work directly with you, either by mail, email, and sometimes by phone, to see that you understand what needs to be filled out and everything. But we do not recommend a course out there or make recommendations for one.
I own a handyman service as a sole ownership. My husband works with me. Would my husband be able to hold the contractor's license? So what I see here is you have the license, maybe he does the work. That's my assumption. If that's the case, he could possibly be the one to apply for a license. However, again, as all applicants do, it would have to be reviewed and a certification of work experience form would need to be completed by someone who has firsthand knowledge of his experience in order to pass him on if that was the case and the experience was verified. Just as a sole owner of the corporation, that doesn't qualify you for a contractor's license. So if you didn't do any of the work, I would say that you would not be the one who would apply for the license. If he did, I would say that he would be the most acceptable applicant. Again, completing the application, and then his experience would be reviewed. And based upon whatever classification that you're applying for, and move forward from there.
I spent almost 3 years rebuilding my home with my own hands in a state that did not require permitting. I have spent the last year as a project manager for a construction company, and I have a 4-year bachelor's of science. Is there a way to use this experience to qualify? Yes, any experience you have in the construction industry, you can use to potentially meet the requirements for 4 years or 48 months of experience within the last 10 years. So that's the first qualifier is all this work within the last 10 years? If so, you can list all of this. It requires a certificate of experience certified by someone who has firsthand knowledge of the actual trade work you performed. Once again, it's going to depend on what the work was that you actually did and what classification you're going to apply for. For building your own home, you'd need to provide as much documentation as possible. That will be reviewed by our experience verification deputy. And just so you know, rarely does ever the time taken to do the work is the amount of credit you will get. They will evaluate the project and what an experienced contractor would have taken to complete that project. So while a lot of people may have worked on their own home for 3 years doing various things, they will look at what an experienced contractor would have performed that same project. And if an experienced contractor would have performed that job in 9 months dedicated to that job, that would be the amount of credit that is assigned for it. But that's all done on a case-by-case basis. You'd want to submit as much documentation as you can with your application so all that can be reviewed.
If you have a trade license already and want to add a new trade to this license, you just pay a fee or take a new trade license exam. So I'm assuming you are already licensed, and let's say you have the C33 painting classification right now, and you want to add the C35 plastering. So you do provide a new application, which would be the application for an additional classification to an already existing license. You do pay a fee, and you would be required to take an exam if it's an A, B, or C classification. Now, if it's the same person who holds the class who's applying for the additional classification, it would just be the classification trade exam that would be required since the law has already been passed. If it's a new person coming onto the license as a qualifier of that new classification, they would be required to take both the trade and the law exams.
If I have been employed in a family-owned and operated business for more than 10 years at a supervisory level, does this work experience qualify for a waiver on one of the two tests? Possibly. There is what's known as a family waiver, and that is for you taking over the family business. So if you were involved in the business for 5 of the last 7 years, directly involved in the business, and you are looking to take over that family business from the existing person who qualifies the license, you may qualify for a family waiver. Once again, all that information needs to be sent in with your application. That a signed statement from the person leaving the business and a signed statement from you stating that you're taking over the family business Then they will look at your experience and involvement with the business to see if it meets the requirements for a waiver of the exams.
Can an entity have two separate applications with two different qualifying persons just to make sure that one qualifier passes the exam? Please no. One application per, well, let me say this. The same applicant can be listed on a license and have multiple applications out there. This doesn't bode well with the application process. Let's say, especially if fingerprints are involved, when was the live scan sent out? Was it sent out on this application? Was it sent out on this one? We do not allow more than one application at a time for the same, for let's say a licensed contractor. And then if you are maybe applying for a corporation and it's the same business name with the same corporate registration number on it, we're gonna catch that also, and that can't happen. I would say, if it doesn't work out with one qualifier, you're gonna just have to do it one at a time. It would be the best thing, and money-wise, it would be wise for you also. Just that you're not paying all those fees because they are non-refundable when it comes to the application fees.
Do you want us to mail in our transcripts along with our degree? So if you're doing education, yes, you send in your transcripts from your college or your educational establishment, and they will send them to you sealed, leave them sealed, send them in to us with your application for evaluation.
You mentioned earlier that you use PSI as your testing entity. Does that include out-of-state locations like Massachusetts? So, unfortunately, no. So, prior to us using PSI, we maybe had a handful of testing sites in California. I'd say maybe 7 or 8. The PSI is in California only. However, there's a plethora of options in different cities that can be used, but it is in California only. So they would have to come to California to test, but there are several options with PSI in California of where you can take those exams.
Can a pool inspector with a county for public pool construction plans, reviews, and on-site pool construction phases, inspection, and final approvals be considered for experience? The short answer would be no. It's like if someone hired a contractor to build a house for them, even though they designed it and they watched the contractor build it, they don't get experience for the construction. Same with an inspector. Even though you're inspecting and overseeing it, obviously someone else was hired to do the actual work. Those people would be able to claim that experience, but for most incidents with inspectors does not count towards experience.
What is the best way to contact the CSLB with general application questions, email, phone number, etc.? So we do ask that if you have general application questions that you do contact the call center, the information call center. The phone number is 1-800-321-2752. When the prompt or when the phone is answered, you can put in the code 129#. And that will transfer you to a live person. But we do ask for generic or general questions that you do call the information call center. That is the best way to get an answer to your questions.
Can an applicant LL have two applications with different qualifiers? So I think we've covered this one. Yeah, an application cannot have two qualifiers on an application. One application at a time, one qualifier. The only time you have multiple qualifiers on an application is if it is for two different classifications, and that would only be in a waiver situation when no testing was going to be involved. In other words, both of those qualifiers had already held that classification and were starting a new company using those same classifications. One applicant, one qualifier per application, especially if testing is involved.
Do you need a DBA as a sole proprietor or is it optional? So it is optional. As a sole owner, it is a little tricky. So if I had a contractor's license, and let's say I was a painter, I had a C33, I could put just Dana D'Onofrio, or I could put Dana D'Onofrio, DBA, D'Onofrio Painting. I cannot put Dana's Painting, DBA, D'Onofrio Painting. Those are two separate business names, and you cannot do that as a sole ownership. So it is optional. It is a little tricky, but your processing technician, if and when you send in your application, will help you along with that process and let you know what is acceptable and what is not acceptable when it comes to your business name.
Will our official transcript be returned once our education has been verified? No, all documents sent to CSLB are retained at CSLB. We do have through our record certification department where you can get copies of applications you have sent in or licensing information. However, all official documents that come into us are retained here at the board.
Is there any specific books that will help me study for the exam? So nothing that we really put out there besides the ones that were on the slide already that give you study guides. There might be some additional information on that slide that states, hey, for more resources, you can go to this website, but not as a whole. There isn't something that we're going to send you to in way of a book to study for your exams. Except for the law and business exam, there is a contractor's license law and reference book that is available online for free download, or you can order it through LexisNexis. But that has all your contracting laws that you're going to need to be aware of as a licensed contractor in the state of California.
Please share a way to reach a technician or assistant before submitting the application. There isn't really a way. All the technicians work with applications that have already been submitted and given an application fee number. But as Dana shared earlier, we do have, for all general information in filling out an application, we have the 1-800 number to help with all general questions. And that's, once again, 1-800-321-2752. So any general questions that you have filling out the application or parts of the application, you can always call into them and they will. If you have a more complicated question as to business relationships, entity things, you can send an email to licensing@cslb.ca.gov. We'll review it. If it is just a general how to fill out Section 3 or something, we'll probably refer you back to the 1-800 number. But if it's something dealing with a specific application that you need to send in for a certain business entity or a situation, we'll answer your question through that email.
Do we have any more questions?
The question for today? All right.
Okay. So that is all the time that we have today for our workshop. Thank you for all your questions. If you have any other questions about your application, we encourage you to drop an email to our licensing division. Here is that email address. It's licensing@cslb.ca.gov. cslb.ca.gov. Again, that's licensing at cslb.ca.gov. If at some point you need to reschedule your exams, you can get that process started by dropping an email to exams at exams@cslb.ca.gov. We've also put together a list of available resources for women considering a career in construction. If you haven't already, be sure to download this presentation to get them. You can download the presentation on the green banner on the top of our homepage, which is www.cslb.ca.gov. And if you're watching the archive video of this workshop on our YouTube page, you'll find a link to the presentation down below.
We welcome your comments or topics for future webcasts. Just drop us an email to social@cslb.ca.gov. Special thanks to our Licensing Division and Public Affairs Office for their help on this workshop. The Get Licensed to Build workshop is a copyrighted production of the California State Licensing Board. Thanks for watching.